the effect of Russo-Ukrainian war on the economy. In this presentation, Marie-Soleil, Julia, Adèle, and Maxime will talk about how the war in Ukraine is affecting us in Canada. We intend to talk about all the different aspects of GDP and the difference before and during the war. The effect of the conflict on the different aspects of the Canadian GDP is also a topic that we will address during our case study, as well as the supply chain shortage that led to inflation. We are going to talk about the economic impacts and how it affects the entire world as a whole. We are going to make connection with the theory learned in class.
The Russo-Ukrainian War escalated in 2022 and became the Ukrainian War. The conflict is based on political tensions and territorial disputes. It has been an issue since 2014 when Ukraine distanced itself from the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Since the first bombing in February 2022, the war has been a worldwide concern. In fact, many regions of the world are highly dependent on this country for the food security and energy production. To this day, the war continues with no clear end in sight. Both sides remain entrenched, with the front lines shifting slightly, but major cities like Kyiv and Moscow relatively safe from direct attacks. We chose the subject because we consider that it's important to understand the repercussions of this war on the worldwide economy, including the one of the two concerned countries. There are so many aspects that could be explored in this case study, but we are going to stick to the one that most refers to the content seen in macroeconomy.
Before getting into the economic impacts, it is important to understand that Russia and Ukraine, before the war, produced together 36% of all the raw material exported worldwide. These exports include resources such as grain, metal, and energy supplies, as shown in the graph. Now let's explore the impacts on the Canadian GDP. Even if Canada was not directly affected by the conflict, we did feel some economic impacts. Our country, which is also a major exporter of these commodities, felt the lack of production of Ukraine and Russia. While family faces challenge due to inflation, the sharp rise in raw material prices significantly benefits Canadian food and raw material producers and exporters, leading to substantial growth in their revenue and profit. This improvement contributes to the Canada's export-to-import ratio increasing by 3.5% in 2022, adding approximately $77 billion to their nominal GDP. Nominal GDP refers to the total value of goods and services produced in a country, measured at the current price without any adjustment for inflation. As we discussed in class, real GDP, which adjusts for inflation, provides a better indicator of the actual economic growth. In this case, much of the increase in the nominal GDP during this period was due to the price spikes rather than the increase in the quantity of goods and services produced. This means that Canada's economic growth as measured by real GDP was more modest. Another significant factor during this period was the arrival of Ukrainians under the Canadian-Ukrainian Authorization for Emergency Travel, which is also called the CUAET program. In response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Canada offered temporary safe place for Ukrainians. Canada received over 1.18 million applications under this program, and approximately 300,000 individuals arrived in Canada during this period. These individuals were given the temporary resident statute, allowing them to work and study in Canada for up to 3 years. Unlike the refugee statute, this encouraged participation in the labor market and education system. This has the potential to contribute to the GDP growth. By entering the workforce, these individuals could help the labor shortage and so improve the economic productivity. Their participation in the Canadian economy through spending is also a part of the consumer spending, the overall consumer spending. Therefore, this program did not only provide humanitarian aid but also brought economic benefits to Canada. Inflation in March 2022 reached 6.7%, far exceeding the Bank of Canada's target, which, as we learned in class, is between 1 and 3%. The inflation was largely driven by geopolitical factors, including disruption to energy, commodity, and agriculture market caused by the Ukrainian war. As inflation rose, consumer spending, a critical component of the real GDP, declined compared to the fourth quarter of 2021, which limited economic growth. Consequently, Canada's real GDP slowed. In the fourth quarter of 2021, the real GDP increased by 1.6%, but the rate decreased to 0.8% in the first quarter of 2022. While this does not represent a decrease, it does indicate a slower growth. Several factors influenced the GDP during this period, including inflation, exportation, and consumer spending. And this is why we don't see a major difference.
As said above, Ukraine played a primary role in meeting the food and energy demand of multiple nations. The shortage from Ukraine export of raw material, energy, and food increased the price of those goods. Indeed, as seen in class, when there is a shortage, the pressure on price will go up. In this case, the principal factor that is affecting and is creating shortage is the number of firms operating in the affected industry. As the war burst down, this further reduced the supplies of goods. Countries all around the world have felt the effect of the worldwide trade shortage. In fact, according to Kilford 2023, there were in 2022 approximately 258 million people from 58 different countries that were in food crisis and insecurity because of the Ukraine invasion. Those countries depend on Ukraine and Russia supplying food and energy. For example, if we take the case of Egypt, we can see how bad the effect of food shortage on countries that needed outsourced export to provide them with food. Before the war, Ukraine and Russia supplied 85% of Egypt wheat, and when the export activity of Ukraine was completely standstill at the port, Egypt needed to find alternative. This increased by a lot the inflation on food since shortage in the supply. The government need to find substitute with Ukraine and Russia being the major exporter. Egypt and other countries in the same situation had difficulty finding other suppliers to meet their need. In short, many nations, particularly with low and middle income economy, have faced food shortage leading to insecurity and high inflation caused by the war. We don't forget that Ukraine and Russia were also as an important source of energy for Europeans. The European average cost of gas was around 580% higher in 2022 than in 2021 before the conflict. While Europeans suffer from the impact of the energy prices caused by the war, on the other side of the globe, Canada and USA observe significant positive impact from the world supply chain shortage. The Canada and United States are facing minor disruption of their economy caused by the war because the trade with Ukraine and Russia are not as significant as the trade made inside Europe. In fact, on this graph, we can see the comparison of natural gas commodity price in Europe to the United States. The significant impact of the war on Europe is well illustrated with this drastic increase in price in 2022, while the effect in the United States remained relatively insignificant by comparison. Like Julia said earlier, this company had positive impact from the war. In summary, the impact of the war on Canadian economy is not substantial, but still impacted a little, mainly the oil and gas industry. The prices of gas remained high from the conflict for European but also Canadian because the global increase in price of energy added to the already high Canadian inflation. The Ukraine war has approximately increased the Canadian inflation by 1.2% in 2022 and by 10.82% in Ukraine. To this day, Ukraine war still have impacts on the economy of countries, as mentioned in this presentation. Many were touched by the shortage and others benefit from it. We believe that until the two countries are not back in the economic game, there will be worldwide economic impacts. Thank you for listening.